I'm Pat Doris. That's a tough question. Welcome to the story. Welcome to Friday. It would be so nice just to relax and have fun with the show tonight. Sorry, we're going to start with something that might make you tense up just a little bit. We're starting with taxes. Did you hear the city of Salem voted to impose a payroll tax? Now you might think, okay, whatever, that only affects people who live there. By the way, we care about you people in the greater Salem area, so that would still be a big deal. But, oh no. No. This is much bigger than that. About 70,000 of you are going to be in for a rude surprise because you work at least one day in Salem. And that is our big story tonight. The city of Salem passed that payroll tax this past Monday. It impacts, as I mentioned, at least 70,000 people who live elsewhere but then travel to Salem for work. I'm thinking that's probably mostly government workers, but surely there's a bunch of others. Can a city really tax someone who doesn't even live there? Well, apparently the answer is yes, at least for now. The tax passed by a vote of 5-4 at City Council. But this is sure to become a battle royale, and so we're going to take a bit of time to bring you up to speed on the whole thing. First, the details. The city would tax anyone who works within the city limits and makes more than minimum wage. It includes people who work for someone else or themselves, works in an office or from home, doesn't matter, it's all going to be taxed. The tax would be 0.814%, so less than 1%, and would raise an estimated $28 million a year. Someone making roughly $62,000 a year would pay about $500 if you worked 5 days a week in Salem. But even if you work a few days in Salem, it appears you could be taxed for each day that you work there. A city spokesperson said those fine details like that are going to be worked out later as specific rules are ironed out. But come on, if the law says that you will be taxed for working in Salem, it would seem that even one day would count. And what if, for example, you're a state lawmaker or maybe a lobbyist in Salem for the legislative session? Well, you would likely be taxed for the time that you're there. All right, so let's get into why the city thinks this is so important. The mayor, Chris Hoy, says the city is facing a $19 million shortfall for city services.
The thing is, we've been cutting for decades. We've been cutting, and we can't cut anymore. We're essentially, if we didn't do this, we'd have to close our library, stop park services, close our senior center, and then we'd still have to cut money from the police and fire budget.
Well, he said decades, and it might feel like decades, but according to the city's website, Salem reduced staff back in 2008, so, 15 years ago, and has not increased staffing levels since then. At the same time, they say the city has grown by 26,000 people. And the mayor points out some of its property is not taxable, which hurts the city.
But as the state capital, we have over $2 billion worth of real market value property in our city owned by the state of Oregon. They don't pay us a dime in property taxes. It's a huge hit to our general fund every year, and we just really didn't have a choice. Measure 5 and Measure 50 back in the 90s really hampered local governments, and that's cities, counties, and school districts. It really hampered our ability to keep pace with the growing need of our community.
I have to say, I hadn't thought about that state land within the city limits of Salem. Interesting point. By the way, Measure 5 passed back in 1990, Measure 50 passed in 97. Both were part of a big pushback against the fast rise of property taxes at the time, and they limited how much property tax money could go to government and schools. So that's why the mayor says the payroll tax is now needed. And with this new tax, the mayor says money will flow to some different areas. They'll go to 3 existing micro shelters for homeless people and a navigation center for the homeless, as well as a police outreach team for the homeless. It would also pay for the current police force and the current fire department. So that's the backdrop against which the Salem City Council held a public meeting Monday night to hear from the public and then vote. As you might expect, most members of the public who showed up were not pleased.
It feels to me everyone has had a hard couple of years. My personal purchasing power has declined about 14% over that time. I already pay about 20% of my income in federal income taxes. I pay about 10% of my income in state income taxes, and my property taxes amount to about 2.5% of my income. This would put it at about 33%. Almost a third of what I earn would go to taxes. This would affect me and my family. I'm a single father of 2.
I wouldn't otherwise be here except that taking my hard-earned money doesn't sit well with me. My grocery bill, my utilities, my gas for my car, those expenses and more are all going up. Even as I cut back and make hard choices on what I want to spend my money on. My dollar is buying less and less, and you want to take more of it? No.
Business owners and leaders also showed up, angry over many different parts of the tax.
My husband and I own a small roofing and garage door business here in Salem. We have a total of about 22 employees, 20 of which work up and down the I-5 corridor every day. As a small business, we are not adequately equipped to handle the administrative burden associated with tracking and implementing the proposed employee tax in Salem. The complexity and logistical changes posed by this tax would place an undue burden on our small business and divert valuable time and resources away from our core business operations.
I agree with many of the other comments here that it really should be put to the voters of Salem. As a business owner looking for new employees, hiring currently, looking for skilled workers, I don't know how this type of tax on their payroll won't discourage them from working in Salem.
I believe the city might raise their hand and ask for help from those of us who run businesses and look at calculators, profit and loss balance sheets all day long on where we could help you. There are several of us that are willing to, just as you do, volunteer our time to help this great city, okay? There are so many different avenues, I believe, to save funds.
Now, I know we're letting these comments run longer than they do on a typical news show. We're doing that for two reasons. First, I want you to hear the many reasons that people are against this. They're thoughtful and heartfelt. Second, I've attended many city council meetings just like this, and I'm always impressed by the effort that people make to voice their opinions on things that affect them. Remember this when you hear that democracy's not working or people have given up on government. If that were the case, these folks would not be there. Yes, there is a clash of ideas going on, but the people are using the system to work it out. Speaking of which, one of the people who testified against the tax scolded city leaders for delay in dealing with the problems and then racing to push the tax through.
Our members are very concerned, frankly, about the impacts of the proposed payroll tax on their businesses and their employees, and we urge you to place this before the voters. We're certainly aware, the arguments have been made that we lack the time to take this to the voters before the next budget cycle. But frankly, we don't believe this is being entirely fair with the voters. Salem has been eating into your ending fund balance reserves for years now. And I think we all know that. In fact, I sat on your Sustainable Services Task Force 5 years ago, back in 2018, and we talked about that in depth there. And as we talked about then, we're exactly in the situation that we predicted, and that was running out of money and having to do something. But frankly, the city's kicked the can down the road for a number of years, and now we find ourselves in a position of having to act rapidly. And so we just don't think it's fair to say there's not time to take that to the voters, because we're in a situation that was predicted years ago.
So about that last part, nearly everyone who spoke against the tax said some version of, let the voters decide. The city council listened and essentially said, no. Why? Well, the mayor told us yesterday there was no time for that. But the folks I talked with behind the scenes, they think there's something else. They think the real reason is that city leaders know a vote would reject the tax. There's also the interesting question of taxation without representation. Can you really tax someone who does not get to vote on whether they accept the tax? I mean, I guess so. Everyone who books a hotel room pays some sort of an extra tax, and really, when you think about it, nobody in Washington state really cares whether you're okay forking over the sales tax. And what about the idea of being taxed for working just a couple of days in Salem? Well, check this out. The blog Huddle Up on Substack pointed out that Stephen Curry, who lives and plays in California, gets taxed in most states where he plays, as do most NBA players, and he was taxed in Oregon. In 2018, he paid $90,000 to Oregon in taxes for the money he made while he was playing against the Blazers here. So there's that. And the folks who work days in Multnomah County, by the way, and make enough money, well, they pay the preschool for all tax, again, no matter where they live. There is, by the way, a way for citizens to challenge that Salem payroll tax. Citizens from Salem. And late this afternoon, the city confirmed that one person has filed a petition to start gathering signatures to force a vote on the new tax. In the meantime, it is set to start next summer, and that question of voters approving it, well, the city says yes. Oh my gosh, yes. We would love to have a vote, but we're going to have to do it on our timeline, which, by the way, is in 2031. I kid you not. 7 years after they start collecting the tax, the city thinks it'd be a great idea to have a vote. I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of this one. So, what are your thoughts on this? Send us your comments, will you? We'd love to hear what you have to say. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.